women are losing their kids because they don't have water. Stand up and fight for this city. And I want to tell you something about talking about you ready for the emergency manager to leave, and you trying to get ready for him to leave. And I'm going to tell you something that grandmama used to say. All goodbyes ain't gone. Because he already told us that he's preparing you for the Transition Advisory Board. What is the Transition Advisory Board? You better ask somebody.
One of the most precious resources on the globe is water. That's right, H2O. According to the National Geographic, only 3% of the world's water is fresh, and only a third of that can be used for drinking. Today, if you have clean, fresh water, consider yourself fortunate, because according to the World Health Organization, 785 million people lack even a basic drinking water service, and approximately 2 billion people access water sources that are contaminated with feces. The Flint water story is more than just about water. It's about a once vibrant city brought to its knees when its tax base began to decline. Flint, Michigan was home to GM headquarters. That's right, the General Motors. At the city's peak, it was home to approximately 190,000 citizens, and 80,000 of those citizens worked for GM. That's right, almost half of the citizens of Flint worked for GM. From 1978 until 1992, approximately 30,000 Flint citizens lost their jobs. The struggles to keep Flint solvent were significant. By 2011, Flint would come under receivership under the state of Michigan after an audit projected a $25 million deficit. At that time, local and state government looked for ways to save money. Tonight, you are going to hear about one of the worst environmental health atrocities of our time. Yes, we're going to hear a lot of things that we didn't know about. Many reports said that only 12 people died. Well, we actually know that that number was much higher, and there are reports that it was as high as 115. And the money? Well, we always know it's about the money. And tonight we're going to find out what's happening with the $626 million settlement for the citizens. In a few moments, we're going to find out what's happening, because believe me, we don't know. Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Michelle, and I want to welcome you to our season premiere of Tabernacle Talks. And I am so excited today because we have a special guest, Reggie Davison from Flint, Michigan. How you doing, Reggie?
I'm excellent. How you doing, Dr. Michelle?
I'm doing well. And, we're going to try to give a little bit of context to what's happening in Flint from someone who's on the ground. I know that you've been an activist with this water crisis. And I wanted you to be able to inform us, what has been your role, and just tell us a little bit about what you've done since the crisis began.
That's a very good question. And I think the term activist, when I think of that term, would be very gratuitous, to say the least. But I did start back in May of 2000, actually February 2016, with a local nonprofit called the Flint Restoration Group. And the Flint Restoration Group mission was to redress urban blight, and to also redress how could we get bottled water to residents who didn't have the ability or the transportation to actually come and pick up water at the various different sites where they were at. That morphed into us soliciting monies from local businesses. We created a socioeconomic model where we teamed up with a company out of Holly, Michigan, which is about 20 minutes outside of Flint, Artesian Water Technology. They already were into arsenic well safety, making well water safe. So they had over 50 years of experience in that. And they created a system called the Filter King '03. It was a whole house water filtration system that was designed to remove heavy metals such as lead, alkaline the water, and make every drop of water coming into the house usable. And so we ended up raising money out of our nonprofit to then purchase these systems and require Artesian to use as many local Flint people as possible, and subsequently install these systems in the Flint residents for free. And, you know, there was a product liability question. And so as part of our activism, we teamed up with then State Representative Neely, who is the current mayor of Flint, and he was able to get a study sanctioned with the MDEQ, which is the state version of the EPA, and the EPA, where, you know, we went out and knocked on the doors and found the residential units in a test pool. We were able to get this system tested by these bodies, and it came back non-detect for lead, non-detect for copper over a year of testing these systems in the Flint residential homes. And so we thought we had a very good model to try and, in the interim, as they fix this water infrastructure, have a fail-safe at the point of entry in people's homes. But the challenge was the money, because Flint people were poor. They couldn't afford these $2,000 systems. And we were fighting to raise money, get these systems put in homes for free. So that's where my activism started and developed. And that grew into, as a contract paralegal and business. I was able to, all kind of money was coming in for small businesses. For example, Mr. Gore, the president of the Detroit Pistons, had put up $1 million to give $110,000 grants to small businesses in Flint suffering from the water crisis. Well, we processed about 36 of those applications through my firm, and we were able to successfully get over 90% of those people grants. I'm talking about mom and pop beauty barber shops, people braiding hair out of their home. But as a business, we were able to actually do that. And the only thing we ask is that those micro businesses get a filtration system so that their customers would have clean water while they were. And so that's where my activism started. That's the resources that I was primarily providing as part of the water crisis. That morphed into me working with one of the largest environmental law firms in the country, Napoli Skolnick. They actually hired me as a contract paralegal, and that morphed into me actually managing their Flint office. And they were one of the lead firms out of 100 law firms in Flint. They were one of the lead law firms that negotiated what finally became the $626 million settlement. And by managing their Flint office, over 20,000 Flint residents under our management that's going to get relief from the water crisis. So those are my roles.
Wow, thank you so much for giving us clarity so that people understand that you were very intimately involved on the front line. And so you can speak very directly about some of the questions I'm going to ask, because, you know, I always have questions. For somebody in the audience, if they don't understand that Flint is in Michigan, and if they've not followed this story, I don't know who in the country has not. But one of the things that I found fascinating is that you have a dwindling population. I think a lot of urban cores can see this, predominantly African-American, high levels of poverty. Tell me how that played a part in what you saw happen. Because clearly we have an urban core, they've lost a lot of their tax base, and now we see budget issues affecting the residents. What did you see in terms of race and ethnicity and how that affected the crisis?
So in Flint, as you stated, it's a over 50% Black. It's over 70% minority. And so it was a city of about 100,000, according to just under that, according to the last census, and steady dwindling, and over about half the population is under the poverty level. And so, anytime you have these urban population centers and majority Black cities with poverty like that, the city was under what is called state receivership at the time of the crisis. So the city had literally went bankrupt, and the city was under a state manager. Then Governor Schneider had appointed Mr. Early, who's a known city manager, the exact extreme austerity measure. And so you come into this poor town, and you're continually shrinking resources. And so somebody had the bright idea to shift from the Lake Huron water that we were on to Flint City water, which never should have been a primary source. And in that process, there was very little outcry, because here you have a town of people just living hand to mouth day to day. And so oftentimes, you'll find these four dynamics in any town USA: a power base, a profit base, a policy base, and a privilege base. And normally it's those dynamics making decisions, especially in a poor town like Flint. And so we saw poverty have a role, because traditional outcry, when you're doing something like switching the water supply, it just was not there for a town that already was under state receivership. So it was a state of confusion, and we believe some things happening. Poverty definitely happened.
I think you give some great context, because you're absolutely right. The city of Flint was in fiscal receivership, and they had to figure out a way to cut costs. And you're right, water savings, to the point, I believe they thought they were going to save like $4 million over 2 years. And they decided that while this pipeline with their new partnership was being built, that they would just handle the water themselves using their local plant, which to my understanding hadn't been really fully operational for over 50 years.
Yes.
And there had been studies done, I believe they said in 2002, that kind of cautioned that if you were going to use local waters, that there were some additional things that had to be done. And it seemed like those reports were ignored.
Yes. I mean, as you stated, context matters. Here you have at one point, one of the most highly paid blue collar towns in the country. This town was surrounded by 5 General Motor plants. And if you look at the structure of Flint, it has water runoffs from all of the plants, literally to the river. And so there's no doubt that water is toxic, it's corrosive. And to switch over to the Flint River required almost a perfect blend of anti-corrosive and things that later came out that was not done, and made the water so toxic to be used. And then when the population dwindled, water had to have a circulation as well. Sometimes in the summer, you would see the fire departments just opening up hoses, trying to get the water to flow properly, so it wouldn't be plumes of bacteria and all kind of problems that already existed before switching from Lake Huron. And you mentioned the politics of the switch over. Here you have from Lake Huron, our primary water source, going through the city of Detroit, another minority city, subsequently going through Pontiac, Michigan, another minority city, coming into Flint. And somebody simply wanted to switch that pipeline from Lake Huron through those 2 cities up higher north, from Lake Huron again through Port Huron and a bunch of other small towns to Flint. And so it wasn't different water we were going to receive. It was a new pipeline being built out of the apathy and ignorance of a small town that had control over where its water was coming from. And now that was going to be seeded from the CEDE, from the city to the county to another regional body. So here Flint becomes a producer or seller of water to now a customer or purchaser of water. And we're gonna put you on a Flint River where we know there'll be some outcry for that. We'll solve the outcry by saying, okay, we're gonna switch back to Lake Huron water, but now it's gonna be through Port Huron instead of Detroit, or box out these other small towns that receive money piping this water into Flint. The politics is horrible. And that's one of the stories that's not being told. And I think what no one anticipated was the poisoning, this level of poisoning of people. People literally got poisoned over fiscal and economic reasons. And you mentioned there was supposed to be a $5 million savings over 2 years making this switch. And it turned out not to be more than $100 a day saving. Wow. Versus the $200,000 a month saving they thought would take place. And so, you know, wow, this is horrible and can only happen in towns like this.
Now, I'm glad Reggie, you did point out something that I think was very important about the makeup of Flint. For people that don't know, that was the home of General Motors. This is where you begin to see disinvestment, like you've seen so many companies. They leave the urban cores and they build facilities in the suburbs. And they realistically thought that the city of Flint would be able to annex these suburbs. But the suburbanites weren't having it. They did not want to have their services annexed to the city of Flint. And so, oops, that strategy didn't work out well for Flint. And then when GM got into trouble, I mean, at one point, there were 80,000 citizens in Flint who were working for GM.
Absolutely.
And so it just decimated the urban core. Help me understand, once they switched this water over, to my understanding, it was pretty quick that citizens said something's wrong. When did they really start noticing that there was a problem with the water?
Well, so citizens were getting sick, but actually didn't know what was going on. In April 25th, 2014, we were switched over to Flint River water. And we stayed on there for months. We didn't switch off of Flint River water until October of 2015. So we were drinking contaminated water directly for well over a year. And people started having skin rashes, hair loss, the kids' behavior, because lead is a neurotoxin, it's a poison. And in children, especially children under 12, their behavior alters. They start acting out. There was a massive amount of prognosis in the schools of ADHD and kids being put in special education when they was just poisoned by lead.
I got 7 grandchildren here, and it makes me to tears to think that what it's doing to them. My mother just passed away, 1st of September, and she used that water. I can't imagine anybody else going through something like this.
And it was a medical professional. She spoke out about the kids they started testing them for lead, and they were finding lead in the blood, which is deceptive, Dr. Michelle, because lead, we're taught that it'll stay in the blood if you're continuing to consume it. But once you stop consuming it, about 30 days after you stop consuming contaminated water, lead moves out of the blood into the bones and organs. And so a traditional blood lead test becomes ineffective because the lead is still there. It has just moved into your bones and organs.
Wow. So what took the city so long to respond? Because to my understanding, even though people were like, we're getting sick, at some point they did start crying out that there's something wrong with this water. Can you kind of walk us through what happened?
We came out of receivership because, see, the state was basically complicit because the state had this city manager. And we had came out of receivership, and then we were able to get a mayor. And it was the Honorable Mayor Karen Weaver. And when she came in, she ran on the problems being wrong in terms of the water crisis, and we have to switch this thing back over. And so she came in as an activist. Mayor declared an emergency. When an emergency was declared, resources flowed in. The National Guard was mobilized, and they came in and set up shop at the fire departments. And people were able to go to the fire departments with the identification and get bottled water. An advisory went out to stop using the water. People were able to pick up kits to fill up their water after it's set overnight and take it back to City Hall or these stations and have them tested. People were then started to have blood lead tests were done, and all kind of emergency measures began to take place. And so it was through the ringing of a declaration of emergency by then Mayor Karen Weaver that brought national spotlight on this crisis, because under the governor who had appointed the city manager, he didn't want to admit that what they did was wrong. So they were trying to cover all of this stuff up. It was a great cover.
Wow. You mentioned the $626 million settlement. And to my understanding, almost $200 million of that is going to be legal fees. Did these citizens file a class action?
So what you have is two things. You have an army of lawyers at some point descended down on Flint, because in spite of the activism, the declarations of emergency, none of that translated to direct compensation to the residents.
Wow.
Could it have? Absolutely.
Of course.
Because the state was complicit. This happened on the state watch, but it happened in Flint. And because it happened in Flint, you had to sue Flint and sue Flint at its water plant. So then that created, Dr. Michelle, mixed emotions, because some politicians was like, and activists were like, well, we're suing ourselves. And whatever settlement happens, the residents of the city of Flint are going to end up having to pay themselves for the suit. And some people were like, no, I'm harmed. And so then the attorneys came. And when the attorneys came in, as is under Michigan law, attorneys are operating under what is called a contingent lawsuit. And a contingent lawsuit means if you hire the attorney, if you sign a retainer, then you never have to pay the law firm any monies unless they get you a settlement. You never have to pay a dime unless they get you a settlement. So anybody that signed up, whether it's class action or the firm I work with, mass tort. A mass tort is very similar to class action, but you're representing each one of your clients individually. And so the client signed retainers saying that 33 1/3 of whatever would be recovered would go to the law firm, because the law firm is in essence fronting the whole lawsuit. They're paying for the experts. They're doing the interrogatories, the depositions, whatever the defendants counter with, they're countering along with them. And you got to keep in mind, it's been over 7 years and no law firm has received one dime. So over 7 years, law firms have been spending millions and millions of dollars financing this lawsuit, fighting it, which eventually led in August of 2020 to initially a $646 million lawsuit that was later modified to a $626 million lawsuit that was finally accepted as a final settlement by the court less than a month ago.
Wow. Okay, let's still keep talking about the money, Reggie, because well,
let's talk about that, because that is and a lot of times when you have a lot of impoverished towns like Flint, they're not litigious. These towns don't litigate. They don't sue. People are poor. They have a lot that they could sue for, and they just normally don't. Because when you think of a civil lawsuit, most law firms know that they have to front the entire lawsuit for a win. And so if I was a lawyer and I got 1,000 Flint residents to sign up with me for this lawsuit, but I'm only going to get compensation for 600 of them, whatever money I spent on the 400, I'm never going to get a dime for that. They never have to pay me a dime. If I used an expert to do testing for them, if I had them as part of what is called a bellwether or a mock workup as if we're going to trial, so I conducted interrogatories and depositions. I'm never going to get compensated for that because that's the dice you roll with a contingent lawsuit. The people never have to pay the attorney a dime unless they get money for them. So you don't automatically in a mass tort or class action lawsuit, everybody don't automatically get money. There's categories created and based on your harm. And if you fall into a category, you get compensated. Let me give you a quick example. If me and
Okay.
you got into a car accident, Dr. Michelle, and God forbid, you were harmed, perhaps you broke your back, you had a few broken bones, and I walked away. Now, I'm not going to recover anything. I'm not injured. You're going to recover because you're injured. Now, sometimes in an accident on an individual, you can sue on what is called like a punitive damage, to punish somebody for something they did. But normally, in some cases, you can't. And for example, I know the law firm Napoli Skolnick motion that this one of the causes of action be, racism. And the court said, well, Flint is not 100% black, so we can't use racism in that sense. And how could a person and then Napoli filed a motion for emotional infliction of pain or harm. So Dr. Michelle, if you every time somebody cut on Flint water, if you fall on the ground and start spinning in circles because you can't stand to hear this contaminated way, it affects you mentally that way. How then can a defendant defend against that? There's no defense that they can make. And so the court saw that as a ground or a cause that couldn't be used. So now we're dealing with pure personal injury that have to be proved or property claims. So if you were a resident and you were renting during the time of contamination, 214, 216, and you were paying the water bill, you can make a property claim, or if you were a homeowner, you can make a property claim. And either one of you could also make a personal injury claim linked to water contamination. But it required local Flint doctors, your doctors, to corroborate your hair loss was attributed to water. Your skin rashes was attributed to the water. Your high blood pressure was exacerbated, made worse as a result of the water. Many miscarriages experienced during that time could have been a result of the water. Neuropathy, lung pneumonia. So there are a lot of causes, but they require what is called a link letter from the local medical professions who are literally digging a hole and sticking their head in the sand, not really wanting to be bothered, probably scared to death that they were going to get sued too. So here you have a form of abuse that's taken place that unfortunately had to be resolved by attorneys who are not nonprofit organizations coming in with skill sets and wherewithal to litigate. They're like, hold on, no, wait a minute. These people were poisoned, y'all. The engineering firms that gave the reports to say that this switchover would be good were wrong. They also had reports saying it was going to be bad. And so they had to be sued. So let me just say this, and then we'll go to your next question. The 626 million was 600 million of that was a contribution by the state of Michigan. 20 million of that was a contribution by the city of Flint. So after all, it turns out the city of Flint is not going to bear the brunt of the lawsuit. And the 20 million that was contributed by the city of Flint was from the city of Flint's municipal insurance policy. So no residents in Flint directly will be paying for the suit. But here's the problem. You had, at the time of the settlement in August of 2020, near or about 30,000 people with the various law firms residents signed on to the lawsuit. After the settlement was reached and announced, then in January of 2021, Judge Levy announced there's a $646 million settlement, but I'm going to allow a few more months from January to May 29th, 2021 for people who haven't signed on to the lawsuit to sign on. So you had residents in Flint who didn't trust anything, who never signed up with anybody. Once they heard it was a settlement, almost the same amount of people over a 6-year period of time before it was negotiated to sign up subsequently signed up in less than 3 months. So now you got over 60,000 people on a lawsuit. If they were there before the settlement, Dr. Michelle, settlement would have been much larger.
Yes. Yes.
Now you have a bigger pool of people to eat off of this settlement because of reasons like that. It's a mess. It's a mess.
I'm going to stick with the money again, because we know, yes, the state of Michigan gave money. The city of Flint used their liability insurance, but we know there were a lot of big name people from Hollywood who gave money. We heard Jay-Z gave money. We heard Beyonce gave money. We heard Rihanna gave money. A lot of people gave money. Bruno Mars, I believe, gave $1 million. Where did that money go?
Now you talk. Now you talk. Now you are talking. Because outside of the litigation, 626 million, those checks have not even flowed yet. There's a process from January the 12th to May the 12th. During this process, the final settlement claim forms, individuals will have to sign up through their attorneys or direct, if they didn't have an attorney, to go into a category if they qualify to get that money. And about 79% of that money is going to go towards the children. And which over 50% of the residents of Flint are adult. So some see it as an unbalanced settlement. However, the science say the kids are affected most. And keep in mind, a few other law firms such as Napoli Skolnick still have outstanding lawsuits with the EPA and the engineering firm Viola. But over $200 million in donated money came through Flint. And you asked the dispositive question, where did that money go? Because it sure didn't go to the people. And you had, in my opinion, Dr. Michelle, you have what is known as the nonprofit industrial complex. And so you have the big nonprofits in Genesis, the Mott Foundations, the Community Foundation, and I'm not questioning their motives. They have been good fiduciaries, and as a result, the money had to be parked somewhere. And the city of Flint didn't have what is known as a municipal nonprofit. You're seeing pop up all over the United States where cities are having a city nonprofit that money can be donated directly to. It can be earmarked for a particular cause, but it gives the city the power to be able to distribute that money for budgetary shortfalls, specific projects, general fund either. Nothing like that existed at the time that Bruno Mars and Beyonce and hundreds and hundreds of others donated money, Russell Simmons, directly to Flint, and small man Joe Bo. It was millions of $5, $10, $15, $20, $100 donations coming in, and it was directed toward these foundations who are subsequently sitting on them. Now, there have been some shelters created, but water crisis money have went to causes such as this. We have a theater here in town called the Capitol Theater. It was an old theater that renovated with about $19 million of money that was earmarked towards the water crisis. How did that money go towards the this theater? Because you had block grant monies that came down through the Obama administration as well as part of this 200 to 300 million that I'm telling you about that don't have anything to do with the lawsuit. I was there's some money went to the Michigan State Police cyber unit, like $30 million. Some money went to Lansing YMCA, a city that's not even nowhere near Flint. Millions went toward that. So in my opinion, there was a lot of abuse in the appropriations of the monies that was either donated philanthropically or came down through block grant earmark for the Flint water crisis, and they went to everybody but directly to the people. Now, did some resources go toward the people? Absolutely. There's something called the Flint Registry, where Flint residents were able to sign on, and this website offers a plethora of resources to people. Some people had lead abated out of their house that may not have had anything to do with the water crisis. They had doors replaced, window seals, they had lead in it. Some people had pipes replaced. So there has been some trickle down, but the majority of those monies are either sitting in nonprofit coffers being doled out, protracted over a period of time, and or they've went to things other than they went to economic, so-called economic projects, like the rebuilding, but not directly to the people down. So I believe that's a great tragedy in this process.
You mentioned that the courts didn't think that race played an issue, but you used a term called environmental racism. And what did you mean by that?
So normally you you have a small outcry, oftentimes in poverty-stricken cities, Black-based and minority cities, including poor whites. For example, there's an asphalt company trying to come right at the rim of Flint right now and build an asphalt plant that's now going to pollute the air. But it's like, you know better than to go to the suburban cities with this. They're not having it. The whole town will come out. But when people are struggling day to day just for their daily bread, oftentimes, Dr. Michelle, you can come into towns like this and with pollution. And you can contaminate the water, you can contaminate the air, you could be right at the cusp in the borderline of whatever the EPA standards are and get away with it because the towns are struggling for economic development by way of developing their tax base. And so businesses that otherwise wouldn't stand a chance in other communities are able to set up here like an asphalt company because it's going to bring tax revenue to the city. And so poor towns are normally dumped upon with the worst of things, with the worst of pollution in the name of we're bringing economic revenue to the city. General Motors thrived in Flint for years and had a high blue collar payment, but General Motors generated a lot of pollution. They had waterways that ran directly into the Flint River. The Flint River never should be used. In fact, what's ironic is during the water crisis, General Motors had told the city of Flint, we can't use Flint River water anymore because it's rusting out our parks. That was named before they did anything for the people. They redressed that issue for General Motors before they
Because
did
of all the
anything.
chlorine, because of all the chlorine they were putting in the water,
Absolutely.
and General Motors said this chlorine is affecting our products.
It's
And so
affecting
they
our
actually
product.
switched first before the people did.
They switched before the people.
Okay. Is the water crisis in Michigan over?
Well, that's a loaded question. Technically, the water have been testing negative for high levels of lead. So if you look at the MDEQ or EAGLE, which is the Michigan version of EPA test on the water, it tests as more drinkable than in many communities at this point. However, the residual effects of lead contamination in terms of the damage, not just on the infrastructure, most of the pipes have been replaced. And imagine, Doctor, here you have an infrastructure going from a water plant to the street, and then from the streets to the homes. Most of the pipes that were replaced from the streets to the home. That's like putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. The infrastructure needs to be replaced at this point because it has been assaulted in such a way that it'll never, you can remove the lead pipes, but the infrastructure is already assaulted. Not to mention the infrastructure in people's homes. There are hot water tanks that are now corroded.
Right.
But and the state is, and the city and everybody's, well, there's nothing we can do about that because we don't know what the condition of a hot water tank or the pipes in the house was prior to. And part of the litigation process showed that many homes were already in a state of deterioration prior to the crisis. And that's why some of the settlement happened the way it is. Let me just say this about the legal settlement. It says 626 million. A portion of the settlement, we said 600 million was Flint. Was the state of Michigan. 20 million was Flint, so that's 620. 1 million was an engineering firm called Land, and 5 million is from McLaren Hospital, who originally had put up 20 million. But the court allowed them to reduce their contribution to 5 million because most of the people who died from Legionnaires have been sued by a famous attorney, Jeffrey Feiger, and his handful of clients were sued primarily the hospital for Legionnaires, and they never opted into the lawsuit at all at any point. So they weren't going to go with settling with this hospital because they didn't opt in, and they were prepared to litigate and go to trial. So the judge, in the interest of allowing McLaren to have some contribution, allowed them to take 15 million out to settle those lawsuits. However, it forecloses anybody else from being able to sue them because they're making a $5 million contribution. Again, can only happen in poor towns on poor people.
It's interesting when you do a search about the deaths, that number 12 comes up, and there was actually an expose that said that death toll was much higher. Do you
Think about it, because so many people, Legionella or Legionnaires has some of the same symptoms as pneumonia. And so if you study the increase of pneumonia deaths from April 25th, 2014 throughout the contamination period, you'll see pneumonia deaths increase.
Wow.
People who could have potentially died of Legionnaires may have been labeled as the cause of death pneumonia, which, you know, a lot of times people are labeled as dying of pneumonia. So we agree with you that that number is definitely understated.
Wow. Okay.
All right.
As a citizen, I guess we all hope and pray that our water is safe. Are the municipalities required or under some type of mandate to educate citizens about their water quality? And if somebody is sitting there now thinking, I wonder if my water's safe, what can they do?
Well, there's supposed to be a disclosure of the testing of the water regularly. And you're absolutely right. I don't know that there's a mandate to educate beyond just natural disclosure that should be taking place anyway. But there's a couple local activists, and one comes to mind, Mr. Arthur Woods, Eviona. And so all I'm simply saying is there's more awareness.
Yes.
But if they don't do the required amount of tests at the different test sites, the activists come out front with it. And so, but quite frankly, they can test and give positive tests and say the water is safe to drink. Most people who I've talked to in the city of, and including myself, you could not pay me to drink municipal water. I'm traumatized. It won't happen. There's no trust for it. You told us it was safe before, and we drank it and it wasn't safe. And so here you have people that are irreparably harmed, that will never drink municipal water again. And then you have another group of people who have no choice. They don't have the funds or the wherewithal to pay for water because they're not giving it out free anymore. The water pod locations have shrank to nothing. And there's a few places that still try and give out water. And you have a group like Nestle Water that is contributing some, but they're allowed to take as much water as they want out of the Great Lakes for like $200 a year. So them donating some water to Flint is meaningless. The corporate raiders, again, remember, power, profit, policy, and privilege. Those dynamics help create this Flint water crisis. It is a man-made crisis, but the citizens of Flint, most of the citizens of Flint that I've talked to, will not drink the water. I don't care what the EPA says. There's a trust factor there. They're traumatized and they will not drink the water.
Reggie, you have been a wealth of knowledge, and I always give my guests the last word. What do you want to leave us with? You have just been a walking encyclopedia of what happened in Flint. I hope that everybody in the audience takes something away, that it wasn't a simple cleanup or solution as they think. And I think that we're going to be dealing with this for some time to come. What say you?
Well, no, you're absolutely right. And Dr. Michelle, first of all, I must thank you. Anytime we have an opportunity to share on a platform such as yours, really still going on, because it's not as sensational as it was in the beginning, and the media has been the way. So what I would say is, let's keep the story alive. And platforms such as yours is vital, it's critical to keeping the word out front that it is not over, that people are still suffering. There are still legitimate concerns. And we have to do things such as create in these poor small towns a municipal nonprofit organization, so that when monies flow in as they did here, they can be parked with the city, and city stewards will be able to then disperse them directly to the people. So it's not over, and your show is probably going to have to go to Benton Harbor, Michigan, which has been under lead contamination even greater and longer than the city of Flint, and that town is over 80% Black, and so we just thank you for your having a platform of awareness that you do, and we thank you for not forgetting Flint, and we thank you for keeping the story alive. And everybody, just inquire, always inquire. The water problem in the United States is not getting better. These infrastructures in these urban population centers are aged, and they really need to be replaced. And the power rests with the people, but the people must speak up. So people everywhere, please speak up. Always inquire about Flint, because it could be your town next.
To say that our government's responsible for making sure you can wash your hands in your own sink, or shower in your own home, or cook for your family. These are the most basic services. There's no more basic element sustaining human life than water.
The majority of people living within 2 miles of our nation's hazardous waste facilities are people of color. African Americans are 79% more likely than Caucasians to live in neighborhoods where industrial pollution is suspected of causing the greatest health dangers. And we better stay woke, because it's projected by 2025, half of the world's population will be living in water-stressed areas.